We're with Mr. Mike Biddle today, the founder of NBA Polymers. We're going to start off by showing a clip from the TED Talk at the 2011 conference, and then after that we'll be doing a short interview and be taking questions from our viewers.
I'm a garbage man, and you might find it interesting that I became a garbage man because I absolutely hate waste. I hope within the next 10 minutes to change the way you think about a lot of the stuff in your life. And I'd like to start at the very beginning. Think back when you were just a kid. How did you look at the stuff in your life? Perhaps it was like these toddler rules. It's my stuff if I saw it first. The entire pile is my stuff if I'm building something. The more stuff that's mine, the better. And of course, it's your stuff if it's broken. Well, after spending about 20 years in the recycling industry, it's become pretty clear to me that we don't necessarily leave these toddler rules behind as we develop into adults. And let me tell you why I have that perspective. Because each and every day at our recycling plants around the world, we handle about 1 million pounds of people's discarded stuff. Now, 1 million pounds a day sounds like a lot of stuff, but it's a tiny drop of the durable goods that are disposed each and every year around the world, well less than 1%. In fact, the United Nations estimates that there's about 85 billion pounds a year of electronics waste that gets discarded around the world each and every year, and that's one of the most rapidly growing parts of our waste stream. And if you throw in other durable goods like automobiles and so forth, that number well more than doubles. And of course, the more developed the country, the bigger these mountains. Now, when you see these mountains, most people think of garbage. We see above ground mines. And the reason we see mines is because there's a lot of valuable raw materials that went into making all of this stuff in the first place. And it's becoming increasingly important that we figure out how to extract these raw materials from these extremely complicated waste streams. Because as we've heard all week at TED, the world's getting to be a smaller place with more people in it who want more and more stuff. And of course, they want the toys and the tools that many of us take for granted. And what goes into making those toys and tools that we use every single day? It's mostly many types of plastics and many types of metals. And the metals we typically get from ore that we mine in ever-widening mines and ever-deep mines around the world. And the plastics we get from oil, which we go to more remote locations and drill ever deeper wells to extract. And these practices have significant economic and environmental implications that we're already starting to see today. The good news is we are starting to recover materials from our end-of-life stuff and starting to recycle our end-of-life stuff, particularly in regions of the world like here in Europe, that have recycling policies in place that require that this stuff be recycled in a responsible manner. Most of what's extracted from our end-of-life stuff, if it makes it to a recycler, are the metals. To put that in perspective, and I'm using steel as a proxy here for metals because it's the most common metal, if your stuff makes it to a recycler, probably over 90% of the metals are going to be recovered and reused for another purpose. The plastics are a whole other story. Well less than 10% are recovered. In fact, it's more like 5%. Most of it's incinerated or landfilled. Now, most people think that's because plastics are a throwaway material, have very little value. But actually, plastics are several times more valuable than steel. And there's more plastics produced and consumed around the world on a volume basis every year than steel. So why is such a plentiful and valuable material not recovered at anywhere near the rate of a less valuable material? Well, it's predominantly because metals are very easy to recycle from other materials and from one another. They have very different densities, they have different electrical and magnetic properties, and they even have different colors. So it's very easy for either humans or machines to separate these metals from one another and from other materials. Plastics have overlapping densities over a very narrow range. They have either identical or very similar electrical and magnetic properties, and any plastic can be any color, as you probably well know. So the traditional ways of separating materials just simply don't work for plastics. Another consequence of metals being so easy to recycle by humans is that a lot of our stuff from the developed world, and sadly to say, particularly from the United States, where we don't have any recycling policies in place, like here in Europe, finds its way to developing countries for low-cost recycling. People for as little as $1 a day pick through our stuff, they extract what they can, which is mostly the metals, circuit boards and so forth, and they leave behind mostly what they can't recover, which is, again, mostly the plastics. Or they burn the plastics to get to the metals in burn houses like you see here, and they extract the metals by hand. Now, why this might be the low economic cost solution, this is certainly not the low environmental or human health and safety solution. I call this environmental arbitrage, and it's not fair, it's not safe, and it's not sustainable. Now, because the plastics are so plentiful, and by the way, those other methods don't lead to the recovery of plastics, obviously, but people do try to recover the plastics. This is just one example. This is a photo I took standing on the rooftops of one of the largest slums in the world in Mumbai, India. They store their plastics on the roofs, they bring them below those roofs into small workshops like these, and people try very hard to separate the plastics by color, by shape, by feel, by any technique they can. And sometimes they'll resort to what's known as the burn and sniff technique, where they'll burn the plastic and smell the fumes to try to determine the type of plastic. None of these techniques result in any amount of recycling in any significant way. And by the way, please don't try this technique at home. So what are we to do about this space-age material, at least what we used to call a space-age material, this plastics? Well, I certainly believe that it's far too valuable and far too abundant to keep putting back in the ground or certainly send up in smoke. So about 20 years ago, I literally started in my garage tinkering around trying to figure out how to separate these very similar materials from each other, and eventually enlisted a lot of my friends in the mining world, actually, in the plastics world. And we started going around to mining laboratories around the world because, after all, we're doing above-ground mining. And we eventually broke the code. This is the last frontier of recycling. It's the last major material to be recovered at any significant amount on the Earth, and we finally figured out how to do it. And in the process, we started recreating how the plastics industry makes plastics. The traditional way to make plastics is with oil or petrochemicals. You break down the molecules, you recombine them in very specific ways to make all the wonderful plastics that we enjoy each and every day. We said there's got to be a more sustainable way to make plastics, and not just sustainable from an environmental standpoint, sustainable from an economic standpoint as well. Well, a good place to start is with waste. It certainly doesn't cost as much as oil, and it's plentiful, as I hope that you've been able to see from the photographs. And because we're not breaking down the plastic into molecules and recombining them, we're using a mining approach to extract the materials. We have significantly lower capital costs in our plant and equipment. We have enormous energy savings. I don't know how many other projects on the planet right now can save 80 to 90% of the energy compared to making something the traditional way. And instead of plopping down several $100 million to build a chemical plant that will only make one type of plastic for its entire life, our plants can make any type of plastic we feed them. And we make a drop-in replacement for that plastic that's made from petrochemicals. Our customers get to enjoy huge CO2 savings, they get to close the loop with their products, and they get to make more sustainable products. In the short time period I have, I want to show you a little bit of a sense about how we do this. It starts with metal recyclers, who shred our stuff into very small bits. They recover the metals and leave behind what's called shredder residue. It's their waste. A very complex mixture of materials, but predominantly plastics. We take out the things that aren't plastics, such as the metals they miss, carpeting, foam, rubber, wood, glass, paper, you name it, even an occasional dead animal, unfortunately. And it goes in the first part of our process here, which is more like traditional recycling. We're sieving the material, we're using magnets, we're using air classification. It looks like a Willy Wonka factory at this point. At the end of this process, we have a mixed plastic composite, many different types of plastics and many different grades of plastics. This goes into the more sophisticated part of our process, and the really hard work, multi-step separation process begins. We grind the plastic down to about the size of your small fingernail. We use a very highly automated process to sort those plastics, not only by type, but by grade. And out the end of that part of the process come little flakes of plastic, one type, one grade. We then use optical sorting to color sort this material. We blend it in 50,000-pound blending silos. We push that material to extruders where we melt it, push it through small die holes, make spaghetti-like plastic strands, and we chop those strands into what are called pellets. And this becomes the currency of the plastics industry. This is the same material that you would get from oil. And today, we're producing it from your old stuff. And it's going right back in to your new stuff. So now, instead of your stuff ending up on a hillside in a developing country, or literally going up in smoke, you can find your old stuff back on top of your desk in new products, in your office, or back at work in your home. And these are just a few examples of companies that are buying our plastic, replacing virgin plastic to make their new products. So, I hope I've changed the way you look at least some of the stuff in your life. We took our clues from Mother Nature. Mother Nature wastes very little, reuses practically everything. And I hope that you stop looking at yourself as a consumer. That's a label I've always hated my entire life. And think of yourself as just using resources in one form until they can be transformed to another form for another use later in time. And finally, I hope you agree with me to change that last toddler rule just a little bit to, if it's broken, it's my stuff. Thank you for your time.
Okay, now that we've seen a little bit about what Mike Biddle does, I'm going to ask him some questions. We're going to have a quick interview, and then if any of you audience members have any questions, feel free to just type them into the chat box, and I'll address them as they come in. Okay, Mike, the first question I have for you is, what are some of the problems that NBA Polymers has solved, and what are some of the remaining problems that you're still working on and hope to address in the near future?
Okay, that's a question I get asked by my board a lot, too. So the problems we solved, I think the fundamental problem that we solved is that we figured out how to mine plastics from extremely complicated waste streams. And the importance of figuring out how to do that is because it unlocks a lot of more material for recycling. You're probably familiar in your house with recycling bottles and maybe a few other plastic items. And you're actually asked typically to put it either in a recycling bin or maybe even segregated by types of materials. That then goes to a big recycler who then pulls out the bottles by hand with humans or with machines or with a combination of both. And then that goes to the recycling stream. So it requires, those recyclers require that the incoming material be mostly one type of material with very little contaminants in it. We figured the only way to unleash the plastics for recycling and other materials, by the way, as well, was to figure out how to recycle them from much more complicated and extremes, because that's really how they appear at end of life, not just in our packaging waste streams in our homes, but also in our products like our automobiles and electronics and computers and so forth, because they're commingled with so many other materials. So that was the most important thing that we developed over the past almost 20 years. We're actually starting our 20th year this year, so it's been a very long road. It's not been easy to figure out how to do that. The challenges we face mostly relate to growing the company and getting it available, getting our technology available in more places in the world.
Okay.
And there's two challenges associated. Go ahead.
Oh, no, keep going.
Okay, I thought you had a question. There's a little delay I see between our video and the website. So the challenges are, with growing a company more quickly, relate to finding the material, which sounds a bit of a strange challenge since we know there's so much of it. There's about 500 billion pounds of plastics consumed each and every year around the world. So there's a lot of it. The issue is having it collected in a way that recyclers like ours, like our company, can get their hands on it in an economical fashion. But that's being solved by many forward-thinking regions of the world, particularly Europe and Asia. Sadly, not quite yet here in the U.S., but we're getting closer. And then the second issue is to make these processes, because they involve many steps and a lot of technology, to make them economical, it has to be done on a large scale. So again, that relates to finding large sources of material, but it also relates to finding the other resource that we need, which is financial resources. And in today's world, with the financial difficulties we've had the last few years, that's, of course, made that part of the equation a little bit more difficult. But fortunately, we have some very supportive investors, and people do actually get our business model because it makes a lot of sense. So it hasn't been a complete constraint. It's just more difficult these last couple of years.
Okay. So how receptive are manufacturers to using recycled plastic? And is this using recycled plastic cheaper for them, or is it something they kind of have to be willing to spend the extra dollar on?
Both good questions. I would say manufacturers are becoming much more receptive to using recycled materials, not just plastic. So I'll focus on plastics because that's what I know most. But there's still a lot of caution out there, because in the early days, just like with other recycled materials, and I'll use steel as an example, the quality wasn't there to be used in the most demanding applications. It took some years to get the quality to the point where it could be used right back into very difficult or demanding applications. The same has held true for plastics, and that's again why our journey has been nearly a 20-year journey. Mm-hmm. We now have material that can go can replace what are called virgin plastics, or plastics made from petrochemicals, on a one-to-one basis. But that wasn't always the case. So manufacturers who tried recycled materials in the past maybe had some difficulties using them. Maybe they had inconsistent material supply, and maybe the material just simply didn't meet their needs. So particularly those manufacturers that had bad experiences in the past, it's taken them some time to come around to getting comfortable with our high-quality materials available today. So that was part of our, I'd say it continues to be part of our challenge with some customers, is to convince them that these materials are indeed can replace the materials that they're using today. But we're getting there, and we've certainly made a lot of headway. We've made a lot of headway with some very large companies like Electrolux, for example, vacuum cleaners, who want to demonstrate that their vacuum cleaners are energy efficient and are also sustainable because they're using recycled materials.
Okay. And currently you have 4 plants. Is that correct? And do you have any plans in the future to expand maybe to other countries, even underdeveloped countries?
Yes, that is correct. We have 4 plants. 3 of them are what we call world-scale production plants. Namely, those are the one we have in China, one we have in Austria, and one we just recently opened in the UK. Our original plant is here in California, and it does a little bit of production. It's still a small plant. It's our pilot plant and our small-scale production plant. We have the desire to build plants all over the world, including here in North America, more than just our pilot plant, as well as developing countries. Basically, we focus on where we can get larger amounts of material, where it's already being collected from the infrastructure, from the waste infrastructure, and concentrated, which means that we can get our hands on it in an economical way. And that's why our first plants were in Europe and Asia. Mm-hmm. But there's plenty of material to be recycled, recovered, and reused in developing countries, and right here in the United States as well. So we absolutely have plans to build plants all around the world, and really the timing constraint is simply on when we can ensure that we have the raw material supply, and we can be assured that we have the financing required to build these large plants.
Okay. So in the next 10 years, what do you see in the future for plastics?
For plastics in general, or recycled plastics?
Recycled plastics, I guess, to be more specific.
Or I could probably combine those two.
Okay, that's fine.
I'll go back to my steel analogy, if that's okay. And the reason I use that analogy is because I think what's happened to the steel industry will happen to the plastics industry for all the same reasons. Steel used to be manufactured only from iron ore that we mined out of the ground. Now, over 50% of the steel we use in the United States comes from recycled steel. So from our old cars, our old appliances, etc. And these are mined from waste, and they're converted in what are called mini mills, which are smaller mills, and they're very efficient mills, both because they start with scrap material instead of iron ore, but also because the technology's come along to make the mills more efficient than the old style mills. We see the same thing happening in plastics. It's just we're several decades behind steel, and that's for two reasons. One, plastics are a newer material, so they haven't been used as extensively as steel has in the past. So the notion of reusing them again has been a more recent notion, just the past couple of decades. But more importantly, as I mentioned earlier, and perhaps as you can see in the video, it's much more difficult to separate plastics from one another and from other materials than it is steel. Steel, basically, you need a magnet. And those are readily available, and it does a very good job of separating steel from just about anything else. We had to invent the plastic magnets, and we had to invent ones for every type and even grade of plastics in order to be able to create a quality that can go back into new products. So that was again, back to your earlier question, that's why it's taking so long to get here. Mm-hmm. But I see now that we're here, I think the same thing will happen. We'll see more and more plastics being recovered instead of made from oil, and that's good for everyone, including the existing plastics industry that's based on oil. And I think just like with the steel industry, you'll see more plants, and you'll see, I hope, reinvestment in this country and other countries in infrastructure to make valuable materials that make them from waste instead of making them from oil, which is a scarce natural resource.
Great. That's a nice outlook. So on the more personal level, how can businesses and homeowners continue to improve their own at-home recycling systems? And you can choose to focus on plastics since this is your forte.
Okay. I'll start with a personal example, though. It's a little bit of a pet peeve of mine. We live here in California, which is supposed to be an environmental state, but yet on weekends I can walk down the street with my kids to our local school and pick up 50 to 100 bottles in just an hour or so laying on the side of the road. So it really is up to the individuals to start the process. Recycling begins with the owners of the end-of-life bottle or the end-of-life computer or the end-of-life car. So what can individuals do is take responsibility. It's their responsibility to see that their valuable materials, when they're finished using them, that they find their way to a recycling center or a recycling channel. I don't know if that's the essence of your question, but that's my primary objective is to get each individual focused on taking responsibility for the resources that they control and the products that they own, and then thinking about them as resources and not waste at the end of their life, so that they then make a conscious decision on what to do with it and not just put it in the waste bin.
Okay. So my last question is, what advice do you have for any students that are going into the green building industry or anyone else who's looking to get into this type of business?
Good question again, especially since I have a couple of young kids. I'm a late starter, so I'm hoping that there's a future economy out there that will support a high quality of life. I think the good news is that there will be lots of new jobs created in the green sector. And what I mean by the green sector is it goes well beyond our business, well beyond recovering materials. So energy efficiency, new forms of more sustainable energy. And it's for a variety of reasons. It's because we don't have a choice, for one thing. And I think the notion of sustainability is finally growing into more than just an environmental movement, which was originally looked upon by many businesses and even the financial investment community as being a nice thing to have, but would never be maybe a good return on capital deployed. So, for graduates, maybe not this year or recent years due to the difficult economic situation that we're in. I think that going forward, however, there will be many new opportunities for businesses to be created on figuring out how to do more with less. Do more with less energy, do more with less natural resources, figuring out how to reuse our natural resources in creative ways. This is going to create brand new to the world jobs, and it's going to create businesses that are more sustainable, and not just sustainable from the standpoint of consuming less materials and creating less waste, but more sustainable from an economic standpoint. Because if you're using your resources more efficiently, your energy, your natural resources, you've got a much better business model and a much more sustainable business model than a business that's dependent on depleting resources. So I like to think the future is optimistic. I would refer people to Tom Friedman's new book, who talks about all the challenges we're facing as a nation and as a world, with the huge numbers of new people coming onto the planet, are greatly increased rates of consumption. And what are we going to do about that? And I think one of the major keys to both economic prosperity and having an environment we're all comfortable living in is to figure out how to do more with less. And his book talks a lot about that, and he even refers to our company in his book as one example.
Great. Well, thank you. That's all very helpful advice. Now we're going to turn over to the audience, see if they have any questions. Let's see. Just going to wait around, see if anyone has anything they want to ask.
Okay.
Okay, well, while we wait, just an announcement to make. Today we're picking an audience member to win an Uncoil prize. So today's audience member is Steve, and he'll be receiving an energy prize pack. So Steve, if you could email us at cdiaz@un-coil.org, just send us your address, your information. We'll be sending you that prize pack. Okay, looks like we have one question. What has been the hardest part of building a sustainable business?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Okay. What has been the hardest part of starting a sustainable business? Did you catch that?
Where do I start? First, I wouldn't limit it to developing a sustainable business, but I'll come back to that. I think the hardest part of starting any business is that first step. And taking the first step is scary. I left a very comfortable job at a very large company and decided to try to do something on my own. That's by far the hardest step. Once you've made that step, you're certainly going to have a lot of challenges. But if you can make that step and feel confident about it, and if you're pursuing something that you love and believe in, absolutely, the rest is a lot easier because you will need that passion and belief to get you through the tough times. And the tough times are the natural ones, raising money to support whatever it is that you want to do. And I used every creative way I could possibly think of in the early days of starting my company. And then just finding good people. That was probably the other, I wouldn't call it a challenge, but I would call it an important aspect that often goes overlooked, and it certainly did in my case. I wanted to do everything myself. I didn't want to spend a lot of money hiring people because I didn't have a lot of money. So I was being overly cautious about letting other people do things and hiring people. And I would encourage any people starting companies to find the very best people you can, find people that you believe in, and hire them earlier rather than later. You'll be happier and your business will thrive because of it. Take a chance on people just like you're taking a chance on yourself and on building a company. So I think if you can keep those in mind, follow your heart, not be afraid to let others in on your great idea and to ask for help when you need it, and ask sooner rather than later, that you'll go far. And I think pretty much unstoppable. If you really want to get something done, you can get it done. There's always a way.
Great. So try to take risks. Let's see.
Yeah, at first that's the hardest.
We have another question. Let's see. This is from Kimberly. She has a question. As with other recycled products like paper, will there always be need for some virgin material? What is the estimated use life of recycled plastic?
That's a great question. People ask me that frequently because it is very true with paper. Every time you recycle, the paper fibers get shorter and shorter. So the properties of the recycled paper are usually not as good as before. The fibers were longer. You need long fibers to have the strength, the tensile strength in the paper. So they often add virgin paper, or it gets downcycled into less demanding applications. With plastics, in the early days, that was exactly the same thing that happened because people didn't have the technology to get the plastic pure enough and clean enough. But if we do our job and we clean the plastics and separate them well enough, and if we don't mistreat them, which means overheating them or melting them in the presence of water, for some plastics are very water sensitive when you melt them, then there's no reason that plastic can't have the same properties it did in its first application and be used again and again and again. And there's been many studies about that by even the virgin plastics industry that have shown plastics retain their properties as long as they're not mistreated, as long as they're kept pure and they aren't overheated or processed in the presence of materials that can degrade them. So, and that goes the same for almost any material. Paper fibers have a unique problem, or a somewhat unique problem, in that every time you recycle them, the fibers break and get smaller. So that is a problem with the paper recyclers face. But they are still managed to have higher recycle rates for paper than for plastics, which I often point to. Because plastics are more valuable material, more recyclable we get. We still haven't achieved the recycling rates that even the paper industry has managed.
So then plastics
I hope
are...
that answers the question.
Yeah, so plastics are more durable than maybe to be recycled. It's not anything like the problem with paper where it continues to degrade with every time that it's recycled.
Right.
That's
it's more similar to metals in that metals will also be downcycled, if you will, if they're not pure, or if they oxidized, and so forth, and that hasn't been separated out. So plastics are more similar to that. They just need to be purified and processed properly, and there's no reason there will be no property degradation if that happens.
Okay. Well, we don't have any more questions. Let's see. We have one more. This is from Kimberly again. She'd like to know, how has your corporate social responsibility brought financial sustainability? So sustainability in another sense.
No, I mentioned that earlier. I think that's great. I'm glad other people think in those terms. I guess I believe that without environmental sustainability, let's call it, you can't have financial sustainability in the long term. Of course, as we've seen, many companies can be quite successful and by wasting resources, but that's on a very short time scale. If you want to think of sustainability in the way I think of it, which is the meaning of the word being very long-term scale, then they have to go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other. You can have some short-term gains by wasting materials or doing things inefficiently, but you can't build a sustainable business doing that, in my opinion. And I think that we're seeing companies realize that today. And if you just even look at the steel industry, I don't want to beat that one to death, but it's a great example because that's played out so well in that there's very few integrated steel mills left in the United States. There are almost all many mills using recycled steel as a feedstock because it's so much more efficient and cost effective and sustainable in the economic sense to do that. So I guess I would argue, and I think that's also why you see more and more companies figuring out that they need to issue sustainability reports. They need to take sustainability in the, let's say, traditional sense of thinking, sustainability of resources and the environment, into thinking in their business plans and their long-term strategic thinking if they want to remain competitive in the world. And I think it's also helped that NGOs, non-government organizations, and the general public have started to value that information when making decisions on which products to buy, which companies to invest in, and so forth. So it's starting to happen. I think it will continue to become a very important part in all successful corporations.
Alrighty. Let's see. I think that might be all the questions we have. Was there anything that we missed in the interview or that someone didn't address that you'd like to talk about right now?
Not that I can think of off the top of my head. You had some good questions as to the audience. I appreciate it. I'm glad people felt comfortable asking questions. And please feel free to Twitter me or reach out to our website. If you have additional questions, I'll do my best to respond quickly. I have to say, though, that I'm a bit overwhelmed right now with the response to the TED video. I still have about 1,000 messages that have been sent to us from one way or another that I'm trying to manage. So there'll be a TED blog going out to try to answer the many questions we receive, not just on the TED website, but all the many websites that have picked up the TED video. If you're interested, please look for that because I'll try to address some broader range questions we've received from all over the world.
Great. Well, I'm glad you're getting the attention you deserve. That's great to hear.
I'm just glad to see so many people interested. That's great.
That is good. Well, if that's it, if you don't have anything else you'd like to add in and there's no more questions, that'll conclude our interview for today. Thank you so much, Mike, for sitting down and taking the time to talk to me today.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Thank the audience for listening in. Thank you.
Thank you.